Hello, everybody. I'm very happy to be invited for this great forum. I'm Zhu Feng, Professor of International Relations of Nanjing University. My major is International Relations and Regional Security in East Asia. So I have been to South Korea many times. So then I'm very, very delighted to have just a great, gathering today for such a very great, turnout of a panelist for brainstorming on what is going on with the world. My thought is really, really very, very frightening because we also see on the one hand, the world is very, very badly stuck in the pandemic's outbreak globally. But on the other hand, we also see the international relations is also going more fragile with the great power competition. I think one of the key factors reflecting the severity of a great power competition, of course, is between the Beijing and Washington. Then we will see originally pandemic is some sort of, we say, global threat to the humanity and for humans, health and the public, safety. So U.S. and China would have been just putting together and working together against such a pandemic's, global heating. But unbelievably, we also see our relations between Beijing and Washington is very, very badly and also very, very, disappointingly deteriorating. I see a multiple factor behind such a deterioration of the great power relations between Beijing and Washington. First of all, I see the Americans, the strategic community, tend to see pandemic probably will open a window of opportunity for China to just, speed up the power ascendance. So then there's a very strong China anxiety in the U.S. to be fearful China probably will shift the balance of power speedily in the Chinese favor. So therefore, now we will see originally pandemic is a driver for great power cooperation, but very badly instead, it becomes some sort of a new stimulus for great powers competition, and there's some sort of a power wrestling. So then we'll see in the past almost 9 months and 10 months since the outbreak of the COVID-19, Beijing and Washington almost turned back to each other. They are face off, also leading to some sort of escalation of their great power competition. Now, how to define the new nature of the US-China relations? Someone argue it's some sort of the new Cold War and a Cold War 2.0. Then someone argue probably it's too early to conclude what kind of such a fundamental change has just fundamentally fallen into the US-China relations. But my view is this. I think the China-US relations now is just one step away from the new Cold War. If we're looking at what is happening between the two powers, we see on the one hand, geopolitical competition is unbelievably intensifying. Taiwan issue, South China Sea issue also become some sort of a much stormy water in front of such two powers. Then the China complained a lot, US just trying to blur its long-held the one China policy, and not just dispatched a high-level officials visit Taiwan. Then the US also very publicly expressed Taiwan should be adopted into the WHO as some sort of a membership. But we know WHO is the international organizations with just the sovereign states, the membership. So then the Beijing is very, very annoyed of America's new Taiwan policy. South China Sea, then we will see two powers really just go into some sort of with the new power competition. the U.S. just dispatched the 2 aircraft carrier combative groups into the Taiwan in serious the times. Even just past July and August, just 2 times during the 2 months, the U.S. 2 aircraft carrier combative groups just patrolled around the South China Sea, and China's eyes also just see it is some sort of very lucrative provocation to the China's security and the national sovereignty. But I think the worst side of the story between the China-U.S. relations is some sort of new Cold War on scientific and commercial fields. Then we will see U.S. now is really trying to nagging on China so hard and keep the China just almost some sort of a decoupling from Americans, commercial and high technology market. Then we will see in the past less than years, the U.S. also adopted more than 1 decade of some sort of a new acts, just trying to build some sort of a new national security wall and warding off the China's any access to the Americans' high-tech institutions and the high-tech commercial items. Then we will see such a decoupling is very apparently and severely just shrinking some sort of a commercial and a social context between the 2 countries. I can give you 2 numbers. One is in less than 4 years, China's investment to the United States went down by 98%. Then on return, then we will see Americans' investment in the Chinese market also just plunged by nearly 30%. It's not that all. Then we will see the U.S. also launched some sort of, competition for talents. A great number of the Chinese, the young scholars, young students have been just driven out of the U.S. and deprived of their some sort of a visiting visa or student visa from American colleges and universities. Even after the April of this year, only just 1% of the Chinese U.S. visa applicants could just be available to the American visa issuing. So then we will see it's not just a big blow to the social and people-to-people relations between China and the United States, but it is also a very clear-cut indicator. U.S. now is truly about face. They don't want just have the more Chinese students just studying and working in the U.S., but they also consider the flowing of the Chinese students as some sort of a new source to the America's national security threat. So then all such things really just again, both the people feel very uneasy and even very horrible. Then it's not just some sort of a high-tech competition and a high-tech combat. Then we will see the U.S. also declare the China's Consulate General in Houston also being forced to cancel. Then in return, the China also retaliates by closing the Americans' Consulate General in Chengdu. So then we will see some sort of ideological competition also now is really ramping up the hostility between the both countries. For example, Mr. Pompeo, the Secretary of State of the United States, I think on July 23rd, made a very attractive and provocative remarks at the Nixon Library. He declared Chinese Communist Party is most formidable threat to the free world, and also calling on the world to stand up against the Chinese Communist Party. I think the most importantly, then Mr. Pompeo also called on the Chinese people to just rebel against the Chinese Communist Party. But we know since President Nixon's visit to China in 1972, China and the US have been very completely different, political system and a different, we say, some sort of a social composition. How their relations could just move ahead. I think one of very important principle behind the US-China relations is mutual accommodation to the political reality in their domestic terms. But now I see the President Trump and American government really want to just rip off some sort of last principle to underline the stability of relations and turning their firing bullets definitely to China's ruling political force. So then I have to say, new Cold War has returned to the great power relations between Beijing and Washington. No matter how unwillingly and how resistant Beijing will be, the US now is not just totally about face. They keep China looked on as the number one security threat to the United States. But why? In a couple of months since the pandemic, it's hitting the world so hard, US getting so tougher, so harder on China. I see the reason, of course, is very clear-cut. First of all, I see the Americans' strategic community and the political community tend to see pandemic is some sort of China favor. Pandemic also leaving China a window of opportunity to get to China, shifting the power balance in the Chinese favor. So then, in the eyes of Americans' strategic community, pandemic is not just as simple as some sort of, we say, such a public threat to the humanity's health and, we say, safety. It is absolutely a defining moment of a great power competition. For that regards, then I see the American strategic community and Americans' politics and tend to just take China as a punch back. Not just pounding China so hard, they also would like to just stop China from moving ahead with some sort of new, such a power dynamics behind the United States. So there is a lot of China anxiety in the US on some sort of pandemic. Well, get to Beijing just better off. On the other hand, of course, the US will just has a worse off. So that kind of great power, mentality is a very important motive behind the deterioration of great U.S.-China relations in the past less than years. Then second factor I also could have easily just figured out is President Trump's personality. We say back to the early March, before the pandemic just has an outbreak in the U.S., then the President Trump was very confident. He think his re-election prospect had never been brightening than anyone else in the Americans' political history. Then we also could see, for example, America's economy is going better, and this unemployment rate is also just falling down. Then we will see Trump's some sort of such a trade war policy also win a lot of Americans' applause because they consider Trump is some sort of anti-globalization nest. But the problem is he's just trying to pull all overseas Americans' investment back to China. At the meantime, just demonizing China also will be a very successful policy to bring the great American comeback to the United States. But unfortunately, just very shortly after the pandemic, just hitting the US so hard, then we will see Americans' unemployment also just rocketed again. Americans, economy also just falling into some sort of new recession. Then the Trump also become a very, very big target for his misuse and mishandling of the pandemic, combat. So then the Trump consider it's some sort of a China originated, the pandemic actually and eventually just not just killed his political re-election possibility, but also just overblown the Trump's some sort of popularity in Americans' politics. So then, therefore, I see some sort of such a hitting China harder policy become the Trump's, pandemic retaliation to China. So then, all some sort of such a hostility, just jump into the new historical high, and Trump and his government's China hawks just trying to keep the China just hurt. It's not just some sort of the way US want to prevent from China's, re-ascending into some sort of Americans, peer competitor. But most important thing is President Trump's personality. He is so stony. He's so, narrow-minded. He wants to retaliate China with some sort of such a hard, pounding. So all such factors putting together, then we will see, yes, U.S.-China relations is almost just merged in the new Cold War. But if the U.S.-China relations really going into some sort of a great power competition without any restraint, without any some sort of sophisticated balance between the competition and the cooperation. What does it mean for the regional security and prosperity? I think it's a broadly shared anxiety across the region. I think quite a few of the countries in the region would like to see U.S.-China relations is totally and without any, restriction to go into some sort of a great power showdown, because it will be very disastrous. So then I think for this moment, it's a very, very important for Chinese and Koreans. We can share the thoughts on how the region will just moving forward with our shared conviction. We need to keep the region peaceful and booming. On the other hand, even U.S.-China's new Cold War will not just eventually get to both sides totally, just go in parallel without any engagement and any access. It also will cause a big damage to the global supply chain, global, production chain. So then we'll see before the pandemic hitting the world and such a very, very disastrous deterioration of our relations between Beijing and Washington. We also see the interdependence and coupled with the globalization. Usually is the two strong parallel to get to the region, East Asia, and the world also going some sort of ways expectably sustainable, prosperous. But now, if the U.S.-China relations is really totally just go into the confrontation, I think the entire region will be victimized, at least commercially and socially and economically. So then this moment is not just some sort of a breaking point of the history. This moment is also peaking hour of our shared anxiety on how and where the region will heading on. So from these points, I really try to share with you some sort of my views on how China could respond to the Americans, such a greater power, the pounding to China. First of all, any formality of a new Cold War is totally against China's interest. Beijing's diplomacy is not perfect, but I see that Beijing really probably has no possibility to just, catch the U.S. in terms of the capacity, in terms of some sort of such a supremacy. So then Americans, China's threat anxiety somehow is overplayed. So then if China just dancing with the Americans rhythm, and also just putting the China into some sort of such a new Cold War stigma, I also see it will be big disaster for Chinese. Then China's great power ascendance probably also will be just falling down. So it's also against almost every Chinese people's interests. So from these points, I have to say, no matter how the U.S. just trying to push the China harder, pounding the China harder, and declaring what the China is some sort of monster or is some sort of a threat, but Beijing should stay the same. We should just declare not just the world and the region, as well as the U.S. The China will keep in the line and to integrate into the world community. So there's no way we can just getting very such a frightening into some sort of a new great power showdown. So any form of the Cold War is really well, not just big damage to the China's development, but it is also some sort of very such an ominous message to the region. So China's response should be clear-cut, should be persistent. The second, I also see happily the President Trump lost his re-election, the campaign. So President Biden Mr. Biden, President-elect, also will come to the power transition soon. So by the January 20th of the next January, then we will see the new government of the United States also will come into the power. I don't think the Biden administration will completely just get the China-US relations into the new course. I also don't think President Biden will spend a lot of his agenda to restore the relations with Beijing. But at least President Trump's China policy will be less emotional, less mad, and less disruptive. So what we can expect is if President Biden could just rebalance great power competition with great power cooperation. That will just not just some sort of relief to the China relations, but also will be a relief to the East Asia. So then what I will love to see is President Biden probably will still keep most basic components of the Trump's policy of China, but at least he will restructure some sort of a delicate balance between the competition and the cooperation. That's also some sort of very positive signals for U.S.-China relations. Third, I also love to see both countries could relaunch all level of dialogue and communication. China should recognize the world, it couldn't just move and respond in the Chinese way. So China also should just self-touring our own shorthands, our own, some sort of such a disadvantages. So when Beijing just very conscious, ambitious to just bring China into the new historical high as some sort of newcomer to the world community, we must recognize that China's rise is not just some sort of glory to the Chinese Communist Party, China's rise is absolutely a bigger risk. We have to just look up to. So from these points, I also hope that Beijing could well examine what is China's shorthand, what's the China's some sort of expectable respond to the words in terms of a lot of the concerns for the China's security strategy, for the China's some sort of such a way to engage the world. So if the China could keep thinking about some sort of a new compromise and a new positive, resetting of the policy orientation, it will be help a lot in getting the U.S.-China relations back to some sort of a sound track. So second point, I want to emphasize is this. So for the moment, entire Chinese government officials, scholars, and Chinese people, we should keep thinking one way we can greeting the world in some sort of a more accommodative and a more expectable manner. Last one I want to share with you is China should also just, spend more energy and time, get our relations with our Asian neighbors, just feel safer and feel excited and even feel more encouraged to engage in China, to keep some sort of such a mutually beneficiary relations with China. So then we will see around the Chinese peripheral, then we will see there's a couple of, such a fresh points, the border conflicts and maritime claims, some sort of a competition and even some sort of unresolved historical hotspots, just like the denuclearization of North Korea. So then the Beijing should show the regional member we could be more helpful and we could be more trustable if the China could move gently and also smartly. So from these points, I also have to say China-Korean relations, in particular, China relations with regional members in general, also needed to be re-examined and reset. Then we should just, showing some sort of China's new foreign policy momentum, not just to get our neighbors to feel comfortable, but also could just, very important way to reduce the possibility for the U.S. to enforce, some sort of a real new Cold War strategy vis-a-vis China. Conclusively, I have to say, yes, pandemic is once a century great threat to the world. But now the great power relations also coming into the new breaking points of once a century's such a new momentum. But whatever we complained, whatever we just feel uncomfortable to each other between the Washington and Beijing, most important thing is we should keep, the conviction, 21st century, humanity deserve just a great, getting away from any return of greater powers, competition, and a great powers, some sort of, military confrontation. Otherwise, then we will see such a great power competition if it's very tragically sliding down into this great power confrontation, then the entire world will be in severe danger. So from these points, Chinese, Americans, and Koreans, we should just keep in mind some sort of great alarming reminder on how we could embrace each other and how we can embrace in the world as well. No matter how great power competition is harder to ease down, but we really know where the limit is and how we can just feel comfortable to each other in some sort of, entire humanly just enslaved some sort of our conviction. We are human. We are in the same earth. We also have indispensable future together. So that kind of conviction, totally rooted from the humanity, is always a big, illumination, big source of illuminating our future together. So I hope the deterioration of the China-US relations is not totally bad things. It also could be a very timely reminder to Beijing we should move better. We should act more smartly, and we should also show the world that China could be trustable and could be just the way say lovable. So from this perspective, we still have a lot to do, but Chinese is not alone. We also hope your thoughts and your great idea could also help enlightening China's future's trajectory. Some sort of such a great power competition will become a great power, we say interactions to get the China moving better and also get the US also getting just like how say re-lightening your world leadership and also make the entire region and the world have, we say, easy breeze. So I'm very looking forward to President Biden's administration. I'm also looking forward to your great inputs. Thank you.